one. Believe the chair recognized the vice chair. He was asking questions.
I was just, again, curious on how that projection piece worked. So if we were to bring in a new city in the future, we just depend on them to give us that projection, or how would that work?
Yes. So DCTA contacted our sales tax consultant, HDL. We were under the impression that the city of Louisville had also worked with HDL to get their sales tax projection. So we had reached out to HDL so that we could get the same information that Louisville was using. And HDL told us that they were not able to get projections from Castle Hills or the comptroller because that's confidential information. And so we reached out to the city of Louisville staff directly to find out their estimate and what that portion for DCTA would be. And so yes, unless those individual entities and businesses within a certain area authorized the entity to have access to that information, we wouldn't be able to request that information from the comptroller because it is confidential.
I'll have to circle back with you on that, because that seems like a really busted system for entities like ourselves or anybody who annexes. I mean, to not be able to get that information from I'm fine, I trust the city of Louisville to get us the right numbers, but really we as an entity should be able to get that directly ourselves. So that maybe a piece of legislation we need to look at. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. And apologies for the interruption. Who knew a budget revision could be so exciting?
I don't think that was your fault.
No, no worries. Listen to you.
Are there any other questions related to this budget revision?
Any other questions for board? Okay. If there's none, board, what is your plan? You got a motion by Director Costas. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Director McGuire. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. Let's move on to item number 2, Go Zone update. This will be presented by Javier Trilla, our AVP for Innovation and Information Technology.
Good morning, everyone. Before I get started, I wanted to apologize for what just happened. As head of technology, that's obviously on me. So we'll do a breakdown after this meeting to see what happened, but wanted to own up to that, and we'll make sure it shouldn't happen again because it should never happen. So that being said, next slide, please. Just wanted to do a quick update on GoZone. I know that we have quite a bit on the agenda today regarding GoZone and everything else today. So I'll just hit some high points, some noteworthy statistics from this month. October was our first full month of operation. We ended up with 30,922 rides for the month. As of the writing of this item on November, we were looking at 27,369 rides as of the 22nd. I'll provide the full number of 36,480 was the end result for November. I figured I'd share that since I had that available to me. Pretty steady growth with obviously a drop at the end of the month due to the Thanksgiving holiday, but overall tracking higher than October. We also hit our highest record day of 1,518 rides mid-month on a Monday. Along with those stats came a few operational challenges that we've seen as ridership has grown. With the greater demand, we're seeing higher wait times, not significantly higher, but we're looking at average wait times of around 18.4 minutes, with peak hours sometimes seeing wait times of over 20 minutes once a ride is booked. Our average pickup time lingers around 17 minutes for November, a little bit higher than October, with, again, peak times also hovering in the 20-minute range. And then these wait times are about the same throughout the member cities, with a slightly higher number in Louisville, but really not enough to be significant to call out. Next slide, please. And this is the dashboard that everyone is probably used to seeing by now, with just a full breakdown of all the different aspects of ridership. You can obviously see Denton continues to not overwhelm, but overwhelmingly higher ridership in Denton versus Louisville. Also called out by the center graph where you can see the distribution by city, completed rides. And this is, and I just wanted to back up and say this is from service launch of September 7th all the way till this is available on November 21st. So all the pickup times that, as I mentioned before, we're looking at 17, 18-minute pickup times. These numbers are slightly lower on this graph because it does look at ridership from the beginning, whereas pickup times have increased a little bit since then. I am open to any questions on this slide or anything that I've commented on prior to this one.
Any questions? So,
Apologies, I think that you might have addressed this at our last meeting, but can you remind me what unaccepted proposal means in the request dispositions?
Absolutely. Unaccepted proposals are when someone opens up the app, attempts to book a ride or look to see if a ride is available, and they're presented a proposal or a ride that says your ride will be here in 15 to 18 minutes, and they just decide to not take that ride, close the app. So they were proposed a ride, they've decided to go against it, almost like as if you open up Uber or Lyft and you were kind of waiting to see how long is my ride going to be here before, before I have to get ready, and you say, okay, I'll just worry about that later and close the app. That's what an unaccepted proposal ends up being.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
any other questions?
Just a couple quick, Javier.
Sure.
The heat map is interesting, but I think it's losing some value simply because it's just red. I don't know if we can maybe look at changing the granularity of that, or does it adjust as we zoom in? I think it does. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that is relevant or not. Just a visualization question I have more than anything.
Sure, that's definitely something I can bring back and see if we can either get a better visual of it or work with the team and see what we can do better for next month.
Gotcha. The other question I have, and maybe not quite related to this, but data centric, is I'd love to start seeing comparisons to 2019 ridership, because I think that's our last really. We don't have to put a big asterisk after that as far as COVID is concerned. Hopefully, as we get a little bit further into this, we can just. I mean, if all we have is ridership by route or total ridership, anything from 2019 to benchmark against.
Understood.
The reports we've been providing 1920. Okay, we'll go back and I'll double check that. We'll think. I think so. Well, you've seen my little breakouts, and I'm sure I will do another little breakout if I have 19 data readily available in Excel format. Can we break out, Javier, on the back end, folks that are doing multiple rider requests? Anecdotally, I've got a couple people who seem to be having a really hard time getting rides when they want to do a ride for 3 or more people.
Let me clarify that for me. You're looking for multiple
So
for folks
if I
that have been
request,
trying to do more than one. Okay, I think I see what you mean.
yeah, if I make a request for a go zone, and I put in there that it's for 3 or more, because you can do up to 6, I think.
Right.
So, anecdotally, I'm getting that 3 or more is getting some pushback or not completed. Now, that could just be a peak time thing. That could be, it's from a couple weeks ago. I mean, there's all sorts of, I'm not going to attribute a system-wide issue there, but if there's a way for us to kind of dig into the data.
Just had some feedback come in from that one. It looks like we can only, the app, and I can confirm that later, only allows booking 2 rides per. So if one individual is trying to book, they can only book for 2 individuals.
Okay, is that COVID related?
I can get back to you on that. I'm not sure
Okay,
of the.
and that's
the answer on
that's
that
another maybe variable on this, is that maybe we're limiting ridership because of COVID. So or seats because of COVID. I don't know.
I can certainly get back to you on multiple rider requests on that one.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Not a problem. Anything else?
Yeah, I would love to know. I know that VIA has added additional vehicles to the fleet as a result of high demand. With those additional vehicles, Do you have a sense of how many of those are wheelchair accessible? And if wheelchair users are, I suppose having an easy enough time requesting a wheelchair accessible van when that's needed?
The most recent conversation I had was about 25 to 30% of the drivers are wheelchair accessible vehicle trained. I don't have that number of vehicles in front of me right this second, and I can pull that up as soon as I can and get back to you on that as well.
Okay, yeah, I would very much appreciate that. And is there a mechanism in the app for users to indicate the need for a wheelchair accessible van?
There is indeed.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And I'll just wait for your response on the number of vans that are accessible. Yeah, that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Javier? Okay, seeing none, this is an informational item, so there's no action from the board. Thank you, Javier.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Let's move on now to item number 3. This is consider service modifications effective December 5th, 2021, and proposed recommendations. Presenters will be Chris Newport, Raymond Suarez, Ari, Alex, Laney from VIA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll kick this off and introduce this item, and then I'll hand it over to Chris Newport and the VIA leadership team. As you recall, in the November board meeting, the board directed staff to analyze the data over the past several months, to look at GoZone data, look at the fixed route service, take into consideration the feedback that we've been getting from the board, and understanding what the interests are in the public. We've spent a considerable amount of time, our staff, myself, Accenture, and via analyzing the data, they will walk us through a set of recommendations that I've completely reviewed and recommend. There are several recommendations that will be made or asked for today. This is an action item. We're requesting the board to, on item number 3, to have dialogue and then to take action to approve through basically an action item that the board will need to take, positive action item. To request to extend the service, as everyone should be familiar, at the July board meeting, there was action taken that would more or less terminate the service on all routes except 3 and 7. So it would take a motion in order to extend the services. At this time, I'm going to ask Thank you for that clarification. Yes. So on this action item, we're requesting analysis, input, feedback on the recommendations. Staff is asking the board to approve extension service. There's a couple of options for the extension service that we walk through. And then on that will provide positive confirmation on the board's desire to continue service or not. And then the next item, agenda 4, will be asking the board for approval to, if there is a desire to extend the service, to provide for a budget.
I'm getting some feedback that the audio is really low on this presentation, so I don't know if there's anything technically we can do other than maybe speak louder into the mics. Sorry.
Thank you for that. It's better? Hopefully so.
We'll find out.
All right. Well, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Accenture and VIA.
Okay, let's see how the audio is for this mic up here. If you don't mind indulging a small point of personal privilege from me, it's very nice to be standing here with you all today. It's been a long time coming. You all heard that.
Maybe you should stand closer.
Okay. Okay, so I've had the privilege of working with everyone for over a year now. I don't need to introduce myself, but got Alex and I here from the team. Would you like to introduce yourself briefly before we move on?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Sure. At risk of harming the general public, my name is Chris Newport. I'm a senior manager with Accenture's Public Sector Strategy and Consulting team, and I've been leading our engagement with DCTA since August of the point.
Hey everyone, thanks for having us. I'm Alex Lavoy. I'm the Global Head of Operations at VIA. I've been involved in this project now for, I think, over a year. I've spoken with some of you virtually, but it's great to be here in person. Just echo what Chris said.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Ari Watts. I'm the Vice President of Operations that we have been working on the business.
Okay, apparently we really need to do a good job projecting, so we're going to attempt to do that for the virtual discussion. We go to whenever.
Chris, if I can interrupt you real quick, I just wanted to let everyone know, I have sent the Zoom notice with the passcode to all of the board members, non-voting alternates, everyone that was on the board meeting notice. So if you happen to hear from someone that says they don't know how to get in, please ask them to check their email, and they should have an email with that passcode.
Yeah, Lainey, if you're on, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Lainey Cloud. I have also been involved with this project from the very beginning and very excited to join you virtually. I oversee the central region for VIA based down in San Antonio. I am extremely pregnant, otherwise I would be there in person. But good to see all of you virtually again.
Okay, so just taking a moment to reiterate what Raymond and the chair mentioned in the opening, just to describe the task that we supported since we were last with you in October. The board directed the CEO develop alternatives to the Connect service, alternatives to curtailment of the Connect service besides routes 3 and 7 that would occur in December. Just briefly describing the approach that was carried out since the last board meeting. We sought to develop in conjunction jointly between Accenture and VIA, performing our own independent analysis of the data that I described, the transformation process and analysis that was conducted at the last board meeting, along with staff, to develop viable alternatives using a number of different assumptions, but one key initial, and that was that we needed to use the current number of available operators as a forcing function for the number of routes. That is the limiter on the amount of service that can actually be put on the road. So beginning with that assumption, I'd ask the team to keep me honest on this, but I believe that number is 16, sir. For Connect service, not UNT, not access. So working from that initial assumption, sought to understand what viable alternatives could be developed for alternative route designs and route schedules, with an eye to improving several different features of the Connect service, if possible. That is specifically to improve the route profile and the schedule, to improve frequency, to improve on-time performance by reducing headways, and ultimately to serve areas that might feature populations that are transit reliant or likely to utilize the Connect service, as well as focusing on those routes that meet a number of equity indicators as well as productivity indicators, since we have the constrained operator count.
So I'm a little confused. Um, we have 16 Connect operators available, and that is the limiting constraint. And we have re-engineered the Connect service to maximize the efficacy of those 16 positions. Is that right?
I would say the efficacy of the routes using
Okay, fair.
the available resources.
I appreciate nitpicking. It works for me. The bigger question, though, for me is everything I've read up to this point is that this is to ameliorate issues on the go zone. I don't hear that in your frame. So were you tasked with trying to maximize existing Connect routes, or is there a reason we're doing this to fix or change or improve go zone?
I think the end result is that you can you have the option through the alternatives that have been developed, obviously with discussion or review by the board and modification by the board, but you have the option of hitting both targets, as well as, and we'll get further into this more specifically, Alex and Ari will, there are additional alternatives and steps that can be taken on the go zone side with some different design parameters and pricing parameters that could improve the capacity and the performance of the go zone service too.
So as we go through this, I will tell you one of my biggest concerns is that I was not presented with an option that says, hey, if we did this much more with go zone, it would solve these issues. Because as framed right now, these bus services end in 3 days. So having an option to say, okay, they end in 3 days, we need these resources because we misquoted, we missed distances, whatever. I get it. This is a partnership. We gotta work together. I'm not here to drag you through another 2-3 years of an underperforming contract. Don't want to do that. But I was not presented that as an option, and I have a really hard time making a fiscal decision of this impact without knowing what my other options are. And so if you guys went through the financials and you said this is a no brainer, we can't do this because it's just ridiculously expensive, then great, I need to know that. So I would hope in your conversation today that you could maybe address some of those questions for me, because right now I don't have answers. And I'm very hesitant to make any change where we are right now without that information.
Can I just make a comment? I guess, would we not have had to know what that is when we decided to get rid of bus service? What it would look like without, what it would all look like without the buses?
Well, that I assume is their base contract that we have today, because they said if we remove, I saw numbers, if we remove route, I'm picking a number, if we remove route 3, this is the amount of resources to replicate route 3 within a Connect model.
I'm not, can I just make one? Okay, I said, let's do the presentation and then we'll discuss. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, go ahead. Fair enough. Thank you, guys.
Happy to further approach the chair. Discretion obviously controls there. Two initial observations, or initial reactions. My colleagues here. Number one, I think a few of the comments that were included in the packet that you may have already read, but that we'll unpack a little bit more, is that the performance and the ridership patterns that we're seeing on Go Zone and with Connect, given 2 months of data, at 1/6 of a year, but it is 2 months of ridership information, that there's an opportunity that is larger than initially expected, should the board elect to pursue this alternative, for Go Zone and Connect in some form of Connect service to complement each other and operate as part of a broader multimodal system. Would be the first comment, and I think we can get into some of the the analysis that Thea performed to understand which, what portion of the Go Zone ridership they would expect, given their experience and analytical tools that you have, be served by the existing Connect service. Where Connect would actually be a substitute, or Go Zone would be a substitute for Connect service. Number one, and number two, Mayor, if you missed the point of the last discussion, what I understood board's direction was to develop alternatives to the curtailment of Connect in December. So to present alternatives for preservation of Connect routes in some form to the default to a point position that the board is already about. So if I misunderstood that. Okay. So I think you all have had a chance to review this and read it potentially before the board meeting. But just to reiterate the approach, you have the discussion about the constraint that we are operating in. The other constraint that we assumed would be applicable, obviously, is that there was the board and the agency obviously has a budget that it's adopted, it has available resources that it must work within. So the alternatives need to fit within the budget constraint. So went through another round of consolidating Connect ridership data over a number of days to cleanse that, transform it, make it suitable for analysis that was performed, and then the DCTA staff developed a number of different route profiles and schedules that Accenture and VIA independently reviewed and then jointly discussed over a number of different meetings, and the result is what we'll get into a little bit further. What I alluded to earlier, the interesting opportunity that is the result of the decision that the board made, which is unique in the transit industry and has created a unique opportunity for DCTA in the transit industry, and that is due to the fact that you have deployed Go Zone across your entire service area. You do have an option that other agencies do not, which is to reimagine your fixed route network within budget and operating constraints. You have more opportunities, I think, that anecdotally other clients of ours that we've had discussions with wish that they had to design a more a multimodal complementary approach, should you decide to do that. So question is, what next steps would you like to take? And we'll get into that discussion. But anything else you guys would like to add?
Not too much to add from me. I would say largely just to echo the process. I think, as Chris mentioned, we together with the DCTA staff went through and I think agree with the sort of recommendations being put forth today, and we're very much a part of providing those. And I think we'll get into some of the data, but I think there's some really interesting and I think positive sort of data to support the success of the of what's been done so far, and some really interesting sort of potential next steps and how we build what Chris was describing, should the board want to move in that direction, which is an integrated sort of multimodal network. So we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so just a few observations looking at ridership. So the blue curve that you see here is FY19 Connect ridership. Red curve, FY20 ridership. You can obviously see the dramatic impact that the onset of the pandemic had on ridership in FY20, and then the green bar, green columns rather, representing FY21 Connect ridership with the addition of the Go Zone ridership beginning in September. A few just quick observations. Number one, obviously you can see that in the span of 2 months since Go Zone launch, the DCTA was able to return to pre-pandemic ridership for the first time, to exceed FY19 ridership, which was for the Connect service, but that is ridership that DCTA has gained and is providing to the residents of Benton County. Similarly, you can see that the Connect ridership is generally above FY20 ridership and increasing at an increasing rate. We expected October ridership to decline. We expected September ridership to decline. It declined less than we expected, though, due to the rollout of the Go Zone service. We were looking for something much more like a one-for-one replacement, a substitution effect. That hasn't occurred, as well as we were expecting a more significant decrease from September to October, just based on DCTA's typical seasonality in its ridership moving into the winter months. That also didn't occur as significantly as it did in FY19. So I think as we just said, there's the opportunity, if the board is interested, to modify a few of those design parameters that could improve the performance of the individual modes, as well as create some synergistic effects for both modes operating together.
I just wanted to add one point, and maybe even make some of what Chris was saying the point more strongly. I would say this was, I think, a positive and surprising result to see the data in this direction. In particular, I would say the growth in September and October in the overall DCTA ridership that we're seeing here, and I think between Accenture and VIA, we look at this data in lots of different cities, is a really positive trend. This is not what cities around the United States are seeing from a transit ridership perspective right now, and to be above pre-pandemic levels, I think is actually a really huge accomplishment for the system, and there are very few cities in the US that are at this point. And I think the other thing I would point out is that actually the one thing that also surprised us is the resiliency of the Connect ridership, as Chris was saying, with the launch of Go Zone. And I'll remind everyone that the board made a decision to offer Go Zone to begin with at discounted promotional pricing as well, making it even sort of more attractive. So the fact that the Connect service continues to be fairly resilient in terms of ridership, I think also was a signal to us in the data that suggested that there is a sort of steady core of ridership on the Connect service, in addition to obviously what is a fast growing sort of Go Zone service.
Next. Okay, I won't spend too much time here. We discussed earlier, this is just reiterating the framework that we proposed to the board and had discussion on at the last meeting in October about evaluation of the Connect service, both its current performance as well as alternatives that might be designed for the future for the board to consider, and a number of different indicators that are industry norms related to density of households, of residential households and jobs per net acre, equity indicators around poverty, income levels, reliance on transit due to mobility issues, et cetera. The stability of the alternatives, and lastly, what we've discussed most frequently is how productive the routes are and the route performance is.
Okay. I think I won't spend too much time on this because I think Javier covered this earlier, but we wanted to just show in sort of a simple weekly chart the continued growth of the Go Zone service. So we still are, given the current setup, I think we still are seeing continued sort of steady growth, and that's, we have data here through November 8th. This trend has continued beyond November 8th, and so we've had further what we think of as weekly ride peaks or ride records in subsequent weeks after this. And so the ridership of Go Zone continues to grow, and as we saw on the prior slide, if you look at the Connect ridership, it strongly suggests that it is bringing new riders and new rider use cases into the DCTA network beyond what were being served previously. This looks at the data by time of day for Go Zone ridership. And I think the interesting thing that we see here is that the data here does not look like a typical pre-pandemic transit ridership, when you might have seen fairly strong ridership in what we think of as the AM peak period and the PM peak period, which is the far left green bar here and the navy blue bar second from the right. You actually see the peak in the middle of the day. So this is something that we, looking back when we were sort of first designing this service, I'm not sure we knew yet what the ridership patterns as the pandemic sort of started to ease would look like exactly. And what we're seeing actually is very strong ridership in the middle of the day. So this is a notable pattern within the Go Zone ridership. Those middle of the day trips, it's worth noting, tend to be more spread out than trips might be during a peak because they follow less regular commuting patterns.
Got rhythm going. Okay, this makes a few points that, or echoes on a few points that Alex just made. Go Zone and Connect ridership by hour for the months of September and October presented on the left side of the screen here. Yellow columns being Go Zone and green columns being Connect. You can see obviously the accelerating adoption and utilization of Go Zone over the last 2 months, as well as with the persistent, relatively stable Connect ridership over the same time period, excuse me, with increasing Go Zone ridership on the shoulders of the day and the earlier and later hours of each day. And then on the right-hand side, we could see again more a similarly balanced amount of ridership with Go Zone assuming a greater and greater share as we progress from September to October of ridership by day of week, and obviously Sunday being exclusively Go Zone, and Go Zone not depicted in this chart, but Go Zone assuming a greater and greater share of ridership on Saturdays as well. Yeah, actually,
I'll take that one. So I think you're, Mayor Gilmore, referring to the bottom here. And I think this is a really important statistic to call out, and one that we found. We have an analysis we run in which we look at what percentage of trips served by Go Zone could have been served by the current fixed route network. And the sort of parameters around that analysis are if the trip was within a quarter mile of walking distance of a fixed route trip, or a 20-minute wait time. So those are sort of the parameters. And we found that actually the sort of Go Zone and Connect services are quite a bit more complementary than we had originally imagined. And then when we look at this analysis in most other places, and so only 9% of the trips, according to that analysis on Go Zone, could actually have been best served by the current fixed route network. And so it does seem they are serving relatively separate sort of populations and trip use cases.
Does that 9% aggregate to a particular route, or is that across all routes?
That is sort of looking across all routes, looking across the whole network.
Would it be fair to say? Would it be fair to say, Alex, that a corollary interpretation of the data point is that if the current fixed route network looked more like the model parameters, then that share might go up. Meaning, if the frequency of the Connect service was on 20-minute headways, for instance, the number would be higher than 9%, which they're not. Right?
Before we leave this slide, I want to make a couple of important points. It's been stated that we're not seeing typical travel patterns. Typically, we see and very significant fall-offs early in the morning. Across the U.S., you will have transit authorities and provide services early in the morning, late in the evening for a fewer percentage of people, but because it's a transit network and recognize that patients that in some cases go to work early or the distance that they're covering is fast, the tendency is to provide that service, recognizing that those shoulders are somewhat significantly less productive hours after day. What's interesting about what we have done, I think, in the conversation is keep in mind that with those overlaid across our fixed route system, those inefficiencies on the shoulder can actually be very productive now because so that's part of the analysis that we're going to do. Not only looking at the route profiles and where they're going, but to eliminate the unproductive shoulders to make the service on average more effective. I don't know where to start. I don't know that I want to restart all that. So the point I'm making is that part of this analysis was to look at the shoulders and figure out how to better serve those non-productive hours, to eliminate those non-productive hours from a time perspective, and then also look at the distance that we're covering. The distance also would dictate that more concentration within the city is probably more productive in getting out to the fans. And so that's some of the complementary analysis that was done. I think the data reveals that, and it's consistent with how we look at transit planning. Thank you.
I think it's a huge opportunity because people aren't using this as commuter service. The flip side of that.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
Okay. We can move to the next slide. I'll move, attempt to move briskly through this. So this is analysis that we presented to you before. We extended the analysis to the October period for Connect ridership, and I've made the points already. We saw, generally speaking, we saw decreasing ridership in October compared to September, although less of a reduction than we anticipated. You see a general balance across the months, and the trends persist. Although the total ridership was lower in October, the ridership trend and characteristic still holds with greater utilization on the days of week in the middle of the week. Next slide. Looking at the total ridership, again, relying on this time of day construct that we've used, a few observations that were interesting to us. Number one, Louisville Connect Route 21 was the unique route among the network that actually saw increased ridership in October compared to September. And again, the trend in the ridership decline was less than we expected. And to Raymond's point, just made, obviously you can see, similar to the GO zone, that the greatest utilization is in that midday peak period. So the commuter ridership trend has not yet returned, and who knows for how long that will persist and when it will come back, given the pandemic circumstances. Moving to the next slide, please. This is a similar view, but instead of ridership in aggregate for the month, this is the number of the ratio of average boardings per revenue hour for each route for September on the left side of the screen and October on the right-hand side of the screen. What this shows is that for at least one time block during the day in September and October, that 7 of the 8 Connect routes met that 10 boarding per revenue hour threshold for at least one time block.
Define what that time block is.
Again, you could see it framed here on the screen, but these are 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., and then after 7 p.m. or the buckets of time that we've allocated the ridership to.
So across the 4-hour span, whatever it is.
Yes, sir. I
the
mean,
average ridership for that span of time, even though all of those spans are different brackets, different amounts of hours.
correct. They're different, and I should say those are not the denominator in this case is not just clock hours. So for looking at the midday peak, it is not simply 6 hours of time that you're dividing the onboardings by. It's the amount of revenue hours that are on the road. right, which is the amount of time that a bus is in service times the number of buses that are on the road. There are multiple vehicles that may serve a given route. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. And obviously, you can see that in most cases, with the exception of Connect Route 3, 6, and 7, that the time of day that exceeds that 10 rider per revenue hour productivity threshold is in that midday peak period. And that holds, again, for the month of October, from a trend perspective, although the number of routes that met that productivity threshold declined from September to October. And obviously, we don't just consider productivity and boardings per revenue hour when looking at route performance and alternatives, but it is one measure that's been important historically to the board. So providing this view on it. Anything that you guys, and feel free to poke me as needed. Okay, so just building on a comment that I just made, this is another way to view the framework that we described at the October board meeting and that we used in the intervening time to evaluate the past performance with an eye towards what might be redesigned from a route profile or a schedule perspective. And you could see the framework factor definitions on the left-hand side of the screen. I won't beat that up anymore, but what this table depicts is, generally speaking, a heuristic is if there were routes that only had 2 check marks, that's where we focused attention, and the collective we, staff, Accenture, VIA. And you could see as well that we have this 4th column where productivity, meaning whether or not a route met that productivity threshold of 10 boardings per revenue hour, it must have met that threshold for at least one time period of the day to get a check mark in that box. So as you can see, we focused in on with these yellow frames, connect routes 1, 3, 4, and 21 for deeper analysis. Okay, seeing this chart again, just a few additional comments on the Connect ridership. We discussed a few caveats that we feel I think the collective we feel are important when the board, staff, anyone else considers what we're presenting as ridership data. Number one, we had a discussion at the last board meeting regarding the data collection process, the data entry process, and the number of steps involved, as well as some additional QA that the staff performed, confirming our point of view presented to you at the last board meeting that ridership, as depicted here, which relies on the tally sheets collected by the operators, generally understates ridership. We can't speak reliably to the magnitude that it does understate it, but we are very confident that ridership is understated as reported by those tally sheets due to a number of different factors. Tally sheets get lost. Obviously, operators are busy operating vehicles. They're not going to capture everybody who gets on board, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, sir.
I think you take the ridership data at face value because there are incentives to overcount right now.
And we intentionally, we think it is the better position to take to be on the conservative side of things. It is what you have,
yeah.
Right? It is what you have.
Right.
But
I find that there are arguments on both sides for an overcount and an undercount in the environment that we have right now, and that's where I have a little bit of concern about. I don't want to weight this with that statement, me personally.
Fair
I
enough.
just want to take the data as we have it. I think we can't. I don't think we can make an assumption that it's an undercount right now in the environment that we have. I don't think we can make an assumption that it's an overcount either. I think we just have to go with the data.
fair enough. A few other observations or just things to keep in mind when looking at the Connect ridership, and that was the fact that operator shortages started to impact the Connect route performance beginning in July. And Alex already called out the deliberate deliberate decision made around the pricing of GoZone during the promotional price period, which I think most importantly for this discussion is just the inverse of what you would typically see in the industry, where you would price the more scarce resource higher than in GoZone, higher than you might the resource that's in greater supply, or the connect routes and vehicles in this case. But despite that, it's interesting to see, despite those factors being in place, with the assumption regarding undercounting or overcounting held aside, that the ridership did continue to increase, and we did not see that substitution effect that we expected after GoZone launch. Is there anything else that you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, I might just add a very quick point. I agree with everything that you said, Chris. It's just that as we get a little bit further into this, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the ways in which, should the board decide to proceed with preserving a larger portion of the Connect service, that we can continue to make this a more complementary and integrated system overall. And so one of those levers that Chris alluded to is price, which I think is we consider an interesting way to continue to do that, both to increase efficiency and the use of the GoZone vehicles, but also to continue to get the balance right between sort of incentives to use the Connect service versus the GoZone service. So we'll get to that a little bit later as well.
We wanted to, when we looked at the services combined, and both Connect and the GoZone service, we wanted to analyze how that demand distributes and how the services, what we can interpret from the data around the complementary nature of the two services. And we see a couple interesting observations from looking at the fixed route network overlaid with the GoZone pickups and drop-offs that are occurring in the service. We'll go through Denton first, and then the Louisville zone as well. Number one, it's interesting to call out the number of trips that are taking place clearly very much outside of the current fixed route network infrastructure that we can see around the edges of the zone, in areas that are not accessible by the fixed route currently. That would be too far of a walk for people to access, which we think is a very positive benefit of introducing the GoZone service. Secondarily, when we look at the individual patterns of the correlation, it's more difficult to see on the presentation screen, but we do see a very complementary nature of the distribution of the GoZone trips with the fixed route network. And when we look at that geographic or visual representation, and we take that in conjunction with the analysis that we performed that shows that only 9% of the GoZone trips could be well served by the fixed route, we believe that demonstrates and is a very strong signal to us that there's an opportunity for the two systems to operate in an even further complementary nature, to feed each other and to provide ultimately a more integrated and efficient network overall. And if we go to the next slide, we'll also see a similar distribution of those two same trends within Louisville. The demand is slightly more geographically distributed within Louisville, but around the current fixed route system, we see both of those same trends around coverage and around the opportunity for the two systems to further integrate and complement each other, kind of building off of the analysis around the mix of the trips that are not a direct substitute from fixed route to on-demand, but rather are trips that would not have, we do not believe would have occurred or are occurring on the fixed route network.
That's actually not Louisville, it's the Louisville Hallandale zone, correct?
That's correct.
It's labeled as Louisville.
Yeah. So that's the combined zone overall.
Great. One other sort of dimension we wanted to look at, which we think is a really interesting one, is the length of trips being taken in using the GoZone service. And so as you can see here, I think to start with, I would say we went into this with the idea that we would ideally like to, if you're going to have a overall transit network that has both on-demand and fixed route components, that you want to build one that incentivizes the right types of trips being taken with the fixed route service versus the on-demand service, right? So I think one of the dimensions we like to look at when we think about the efficiency of an on-demand service is the length of trip. We do this for a couple of reasons. One is trips that are too long can tie GoZone or on-demand vans to long routes, which ties up those vans so that other folks who might be taking shorter trips can't use those vans. Secondarily, sometimes those longer trips can direct vans to lower demand areas. And then lastly, and I think this is a little bit of a counterintuitive point, but it is actually generally more difficult to aggregate other passengers on longer trips because the van is tied up on a specific trip, a specific route, and heading to a specific drop-off, and can only deviate so much off of that route. And so when we look at this length of trip analysis for GoZone, we see that they're actually just shy of 40% of rides are actually more than 4 miles, which is a fairly high percentage. And so one of the things we think we can do to improve the efficiency of GoZone, particularly if done in conjunction with some of the fixed route connect changes we're talking about today, would be to create better incentives for some of these longer trips to be taken either directly with the fixed route network or as using GoZone as a feeder for shorter trips to get to a fixed route trip. So what we think of as a sort of we call it intermodal trip. And one of the levers that we can use to do this, and we'll get into it a little bit more, is pricing. And so we think both pricing, but also technology based on distance can sort of help us do that.
Right now, for a few minutes. How long do you think we need to?
Probably about 15, 20 minutes.